The bitter Wyoming wind had a way of turning even the kindest hearts to stone. But Morgan Keller's had been cold long before he rode into the dusty town of Redemption Creek in the autumn of 1875. The locals whispered about him before he'd even dismounted his dark stallion, their curious eyes following his tall, imposing figure as he strode down the main street, spurs jingling with each deliberate step. "That's him," the barber muttered to the blacksmith as Morgan passed by. "The cold cowboy, they call him. Heard he rode with Parker's gang before going straight. Never smiles, never drinks, never dances with the ladies. Just drifts from town to town, doing whatever job pays enough to keep him moving." Morgan heard the whispers but paid them no mind. He'd earned that moniker over the years, and it served him well. People kept their distance, which was exactly how he preferred it. At 32, he'd seen enough of humanity's darker nature to know that connections only led to pain. His own family had been taken by fever when he was just 14, and the few friends he'd made afterward had either betrayed him or died with bullets in their backs. He secured his horse outside the local saloon, adjusting his worn black hat over eyes that matched the steel gray of storm clouds. His face, weathered by sun and hardship, remained expressionless as he pushed through the swinging doors. The piano player faltered for just a moment as Morgan entered, and several heads turned. The room wasn't crowded, it was only midday, but those present seemed to collectively hold their breath. Morgan ignored them all and approached the bar. "Whiskey," he said, his deep voice barely above a growl. The bartender, a portly man with mutton chops, nodded and poured a generous shot. "New in town?" Morgan merely grunted in response, placing a coin on the counter. He didn't come for conversation. "If you're looking for work," the bartender continued, undeterred by Morgan's silence, "the Wilson place about 3 miles east is hiring. Widow Wilson's been struggling since her husband passed last winter." Morgan tossed back his drink and was about to order another when a commotion outside caught everyone's attention. A woman's desperate voice carried through the thin walls, followed by a child's frightened cry. "Please, someone help us." Most patrons merely glanced toward the doors, then returned to their drinks. Morgan remained still, but something in the woman's voice, a raw desperation that echoed his own long-buried pain, made him turn. Through the dusty windows, he saw her, a slender woman with honey-colored hair falling loose from what had once been a neat bun. She was clutching a small girl to her side, both of them covered in dirt and looking as if they'd been running for miles. 3 rough-looking men on horseback were approaching slowly from the edge of town, like wolves closing in on wounded prey. "Nobody get involved," a gruff voice called from the corner. "That's the Donovan gang. They've been hunting that woman for 2 days now." Morgan's jaw tightened. The Donovans were notorious for their brutality, especially toward women who dared defy them. Without conscious thought, he found himself moving toward the door, his hand instinctively resting on the worn grip of his Colt revolver. The woman spotted him as he stepped onto the boardwalk, her hazel eyes wide with terror and exhaustion. "Please," she gasped. "They killed my brother. They'll kill us too." The little girl, no more than 5 years old, looked up at Morgan with eyes too solemn for her tender age. Her small hand clutched her mother's skirt, her blonde curls matted with dust and tangled by the wind. "Get inside," Morgan said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The woman hesitated only briefly before rushing past him into the saloon, shielding her daughter from the sight of what might happen next. Morgan stepped fully into the street, his stance casual but his eyes alert as the 3 riders approached. "This ain't your business, stranger," called the lead rider, a man with a ragged scar running from his eye to his chin. "That woman stole something of ours, and we aim to get it back." Morgan's expression remained impassive. "The lady says different." The scarred man laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "The lady's a liar. Now step aside before you get hurt." 3 against 1, Morgan observed calmly. Seems unfair. His hand hadn't moved from his gun, but everyone in the street could feel the tension building. Last chance, the scarred man warned, his own hand hovering near his holster. What happened next became the stuff of legend in Redemption Creek. Morgan drew and fired 3 times with such fluid precision that onlookers would later disagree about whether they'd even seen him move. 2 of the men tumbled from their horses, wounded but alive. The scarred leader managed to pull his gun, but Morgan's 4th shot sent it spinning from his hand. "Ride out," Morgan said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "Don't come back." The scarred man cradled his bleeding hand, his face contorted with rage. "You're dead, mister. You just don't know it yet." Morgan stepped closer, his eyes as cold as a winter river. "I've been dead for years, but I can still send you to hell first." Something in his voice, the absolute certainty in it, made the scarred man flinch. With a curse, he signaled to his companions, who were struggling back onto their horses, and the 3 of them rode away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Morgan holstered his gun and turned back toward the saloon. The entire confrontation had taken less than a minute. Inside, he found the woman and her daughter huddled near the bar, every eye in the place now fixed on them. "Thank you," the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm Penelope Wilson. This is my daughter, Emma." Morgan blinked. "Wilson? The widow Wilson?" She nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Though I wasn't a widow until 3 days ago. My brother and I ran the ranch since my husband died. The Donovans wanted our land and water rights. When we refused to sell, they—" Her voice broke, and she pulled Emma closer. "Mama's brave," the little girl said suddenly, looking up at Morgan with surprising steadiness. "But she's scared. Are you going to help us?" Morgan found himself caught in the child's innocent gaze. For the briefest moment, he saw himself at that age, scared, vulnerable, needing someone stronger to make the world safe again. "I don't get involved in other people's troubles," he said, the words automatic, practiced. Emma's small face fell, but she nodded with a resignation no child should possess. "That's okay. Everyone's scared of the bad men." The bartender cleared his throat. "Miss Penelope, you and little Emma can stay upstairs tonight. I've got a spare room." "Thank you, Howard," Penelope said gratefully. "But we need to get back to the ranch. There are animals to tend, and we can't just abandon everything Peter worked so hard to build." "The Donovans will be back," Morgan found himself saying. "With more men." Penelope met his gaze squarely, a quiet dignity in her stance despite her disheveled appearance. "I know, but it's our home, Emma's future. I won't let them take it." Morgan should have walked away then. He'd done more than most would have already, standing up to the Donovans. His plan had been to stay in town for one night before moving on, as he always did. Attachment was dangerous. Roots were a luxury he couldn't afford. Yet something held him in place, perhaps the determined set of Penelope's jaw, or the way little Emma watched him with those 2 old eyes. "I hear you're looking for help at your ranch," he said finally, the words surprising even himself. Hope flickered across Penelope's face. "We are. It's just been me and Emma since my husband died, and then my brother came to help. But now—" She swallowed hard. "We can't pay much." "I don't need much," Morgan replied. "Room, board, and whatever you can spare." The decision made, Morgan found himself riding beside a borrowed wagon that afternoon, Penelope at the reins with Emma beside her. His stallion, Phantom, seemed uneasy with this departure from their usual solitary routine. "You got a name?" Penelope asked as they left town, her voice stronger now that they were putting distance between themselves and the Donovans. "Morgan. Morgan Keller." She nodded, her eyes on the road ahead. Well, Mr. Keller, I should warn you that the ranch isn't much. 100 acres, most of it grazing land. The house is small, and the barn needs work. I've slept in worse places. I'm sure you have. She glanced at him. I noticed folks in town call you something else. The cold cowboy. Morgan's face remained impassive. People talk too much. I'm grateful for what you did back there, she continued. But I need to know, are you running from something? The law, maybe? I won't judge, but I need to know what kind of danger I might be bringing to Emma. No law after me, Morgan said truthfully. And I don't intend to bring you trouble. I'll help get your ranch in order, keep the Donovans away if they come back, and then move on. Penelope seemed to accept this, falling silent as they followed the winding dirt road eastward. Emma, however, watched Morgan with open curiosity. Do you know any stories? She asked suddenly. Morgan blinked, caught off guard. Stories. Uncle Peter used to tell me stories before bed. About brave cowboys and Indians and adventure. Her small face clouded. But he's gone now. Morgan shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. I don't know many stories, little one. That's okay, Emma said, her disappointment evident. Maybe you can learn some. They arrived at the Wilson Ranch as the sun was beginning to set. It was indeed modest, a small 2-story house with a wraparound porch, a weathered barn, and a few outlying structures. The land stretched out around them, the distant mountains providing a dramatic backdrop against the fading light. It's not much, Penelope said again as they stopped before the house. But it's home. Morgan helped them down from the wagon, noticing how Penelope winced slightly as her feet touched the ground. You're hurt. Just a twisted ankle. From running. She attempted a smile. I'll be fine after some rest. He nodded, already assessing the property with a practiced eye. The fences needed repair, and the barn door hung crookedly on its hinges. The cattle he could see in the distance appeared healthy but few in number. It would take work to make this place profitable. More than one woman and a child could manage alone. Emma tugged at his coat. Are you hungry, Mr. Morgan? Mama makes the best biscuits in the territory. Despite himself, Morgan felt something in his chest loosen at the child's earnest expression. I could eat. That first evening established a pattern that would carry through the following weeks. Penelope cooked simple but hearty meals. Emma chattered during dinner, asking endless questions that Morgan answered with increasing patience. And after the child was tucked into bed, Morgan and Penelope would sit on the porch, discussing the work needed around the ranch. Morgan rose before dawn each day, repairing fences, tending to the livestock, and reinforcing the buildings. He set up warning systems around the property in case the Donovans returned and taught Penelope how to use her late husband's rifle. The work was endless, but Morgan found an unexpected satisfaction in it, in making something better, stronger, safer. He told himself it was temporary, that he'd leave once the ranch was secure. But as October turned to November, he made no preparations to depart. One evening, as the first snow of the season dusted the distant peaks, Morgan sat on the porch steps mending a bridle. Emma had been watching him work, her small presence oddly comforting rather than intrusive. Mr. Morgan, she said thoughtfully, why do they call you cold? His hands stilled on the leather. Because I don't talk much. Don't smile much either. Emma considered this. But you're not cold. You're warm. Morgan looked at her, genuinely puzzled. What makes you say that? You fixed my doll when her arm came loose, and you always check for monsters under my bed even though you say they're not real. Cold people don't do that. She leaned against his arm. I think you just forgot how to show people you're warm. Morgan had no response to that. He resumed his work on the bridle, but Emma's words echoed in his mind long after she'd gone inside. That night, Morgan dreamed of his family for the first time in years, not of their deaths, as he usually did, but of the happy times before. His mother's laugh, his father's strong hands guiding him to saddle a horse, his sister's singing as she helped with chores. He woke with tears on his face, something he hadn't experienced since he was a boy. As he stepped onto the porch for his customary pre-dawn coffee, he found Penelope already there, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. "You're up early," he observed, joining her at the railing. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Too much on my mind." Morgan nodded, understanding all too well. They stood in companionable silence, watching the eastern sky lighten. "Emma adores you," Penelope said eventually. "I've never seen her take to anyone so quickly." Morgan shifted uncomfortably. "She's a good kid." "She is." Penelope turned to face him fully. "She's also perceptive. She sees something in you that others miss." "And what's that?" "Goodness," Penelope said simply. "Despite everything you've been through, whatever made you build those walls, she sees the good man underneath." Morgan looked away, uncomfortable with her assessment. "You don't know what I've done." "I know what you're doing now," she countered. "You've worked from sunrise to sunset getting this place in order. You've taught me to defend myself. You've checked on Emma every night to make sure she's sleeping peacefully." Her voice softened. "You may have a reputation, Morgan Keller, but your actions tell a different story." Before he could respond, they heard riders approaching, at least half a dozen, moving fast. Morgan's hand went to his gun. "Get inside," he ordered. "Wake Emma and go to the back room. Use the rifle if you have to." Penelope hesitated, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, Morgan thought she might argue, but then she nodded and hurried inside. Morgan positioned himself on the porch, partially concealed by a support post, and waited. The riders came into view as the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon. 6 men, led by the scarred Donovan he'd encountered in town. They pulled up short of the house, spreading out in a loose semicircle. "Came to finish our business," Donovan called. "The woman and the land. Hand them over and you might walk away." Morgan stepped fully into view, his gun drawn but pointed downward. "This land belongs to Mrs. Wilson. She's not selling." Donovan spat on the ground. "Mrs. Wilson's got no choice. Either she sells, or she joins her brother and husband in the ground." "There's a third option," Morgan replied calmly. "You leave, forget this place exists, and live to see another sunrise." The men laughed, but there was uneasiness beneath their bravado. Morgan's reputation had grown since the confrontation in town. 6 against 1, Donovan said, echoing Morgan's earlier words. "Seems unfair." "For you," Morgan agreed, his voice cold. "You should have brought more men." What happened next was later described by the only surviving Donovan as like watching death himself ride out of hell. Morgan fired with deadly precision, wounding rather than killing when possible, but showing no hesitation when necessary. 2 men fell immediately, one dead before he hit the ground. The others scattered, firing wildly as they sought cover. A bullet grazed Morgan's arm, another his side, but he barely felt the sting. He moved like a ghost between the buildings, appearing where they least expected, always one step ahead. In less than 5 minutes, 4 men lay dead or wounded, and Donovan himself was pinned down behind a water trough, bleeding from a shoulder wound. "It's over, Donovan," Morgan called. "Drop your gun and ride out. This is your last chance." For a moment, Morgan thought the man would surrender. Then Donovan lunged to his feet, gun raised but not toward Morgan. He was aiming at the house, where Penelope stood in the doorway, rifle in hand. Morgan's final shot caught Donovan in the chest. The outlaw staggered, a look of surprise crossing his scarred face before he collapsed. In the sudden silence, Morgan became aware of his own labored breathing and the warm blood seeping through his shirt. The remaining unwounded Donovan man had already fled, his horse's hoofbeats fading in the distance. "Morgan!" Penelope was running toward him, her face pale. "You're hurt." He shook his head, though the world had begun to spin slightly. "Not bad. Check on Emma." "She's safe," Penelope assured him, leading him toward the house. "But you need tending." Inside, Emma watched with wide eyes as Penelope helped Morgan to a chair and began cutting away his bloodied shirt. The wounds weren't life-threatening, but they needed cleaning and stitching. "Does it hurt very bad?" Emma asked, her small face pinched with worry. Morgan managed a tight smile. "I've had worse, little one." While Penelope gathered supplies to treat his wounds, Emma brought Morgan a glass of water, her movements careful and deliberate. "You saved us again," she said solemnly. "Like a hero in a story." Morgan shook his head. "Not a hero, Emma. Just doing what needed doing." Emma considered this as Penelope returned and began cleaning his wounds. The process was painful, but Morgan remained stoic, not wanting to frighten the child further. "What happens now?" Emma asked, watching her mother work. "Will more bad men come?" Morgan and Penelope exchanged glances. "The sheriff will need to be notified," Penelope said. "But I think the Donovans won't trouble us again." "And Mr. Morgan?" Emma pressed. "Will he stay with us?" The question hung in the air. Morgan had always planned to leave once the immediate danger was past. The open road had been his only constant companion for so long. "That's up to Mr. Morgan," Penelope said carefully, not meeting his eyes as she bandaged his arm. Morgan found himself at a crossroads. The thought of leaving brought a hollow feeling he hadn't anticipated. In just a few short weeks, this small ranch with its determined mistress and precocious child had become more of a home than anywhere he'd been in 18 years. "I should mend that south fence before winter sets in properly," he said finally. "And the barn roof needs work. Might take a while." Penelope's hands stilled on the bandage, hope flickering across her face. "How long a while?" Morgan met her gaze steadily. "As long as you'll have me." The weeks that followed brought healing not just for Morgan's physical wounds, but for deeper ones as well. The sheriff from Redemption Creek came to investigate the Donovan incident and, satisfied that Morgan had acted in self-defense, left with a warning to keep the peace. As December arrived, the ranch transformed. Morgan repaired the house and barn to withstand the harsh Wyoming winter. Penelope added small touches that made the place feel more like a home: new curtains, a rag rug by the fireplace, wildflowers dried and arranged in mason jars. Emma insisted they cut a small pine tree to bring inside for Christmas, a tradition Morgan hadn't observed since his family died. He found himself helping her decorate it with paper chains and carved wooden ornaments he made in the evenings. The change in Morgan was gradual but unmistakable. The perpetual tension in his shoulders eased. He began to smile more readily, especially at Emma's antics. His responses grew longer, fuller, as if he was relearning the art of conversation after years of silence. One evening, as Christmas approached, Morgan sat by the fire whittling a small wooden horse for Emma's collection. Penelope watched him from her rocking chair, her sewing forgotten in her lap. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "no one in town would believe it if they could see you now." Morgan looked up, raising an eyebrow. "See what?" "The infamous cold cowboy, making toys and telling bedtime stories." She smiled. "Your reputation would be ruined." He returned to his carving, but there was a lightness in his expression that hadn't been there before. "Maybe some reputations deserve ruining." "Maybe so," she agreed. "Emma was right about you from the start." Before Morgan could respond, they heard small footsteps on the stairs. Emma appeared in her nightgown, clutching her favorite doll. "I can't sleep," she announced. Can I sit with you for a while? Penelope began to rise, but Morgan gestured for her to stay seated. Come here, little one, he said, setting aside his carving. Emma climbed onto his lap without hesitation, settling against his chest as if she belonged there. Tell me a story, she requested sleepily. Morgan hesitated, then began a tale about a wild Mustang that no one could tame until a patient, kind-hearted girl showed it what trust meant. It wasn't a practice story, but one that flowed from somewhere deep inside him, somewhere he thought had dried up long ago. When he finished, Emma was nearly asleep, her small body heavy against him. Mr. Morgan, she murmured, do you like being here with us? I do, he answered honestly. Good, she yawned, because I asked Santa to make you stay forever. Her next words, spoken on the edge of sleep, changed everything. Please be my daddy. Morgan froze, his eyes meeting Penelope's over Emma's head. He saw her cheeks flush, but she didn't look away. Emma, she said gently, Mr. Morgan is our friend. We can't ask him to. Why not? Emma interrupted, suddenly more awake. He takes care of us. He makes the bad men go away. He fixes things when they break. Her logic was impeccable in its childish simplicity. And he likes you, Mama. I see him looking at you when you don't see. Now it was Morgan's turn to feel heat rise in his face. The child was far too observant. Emma, that's enough, Penelope said firmly, though her own cheeks were pink. It's well past your bedtime. Say good night to Mr. Morgan. Emma sighed dramatically but obediently slid from Morgan's lap. She hugged him tightly around the neck. Good night, Mr. Morgan. Think about being my daddy, please. After Penelope had taken Emma upstairs, Morgan remained by the fire, his thoughts in turmoil. The child's innocent request had unveiled feelings he'd been trying to ignore for weeks. He did care for Penelope, admired her strength, her gentleness, her unwavering devotion to her daughter. And Emma, that little girl, had somehow slipped past all his defenses from the first moment she'd looked at him with those solemn eyes. When Penelope returned, she stood awkwardly at the edge of the room. I'm sorry about that, she said. Emma doesn't always understand boundaries. Morgan rose slowly, crossing to where she stood. She understands more than most grown folks. Penelope met his gaze, vulnerability and hope mingling in her expression. What do you mean? She sees things clearly, Morgan said, without the complications adults create. And what does she see? Penelope's voice was barely above a whisper. Morgan took a step closer. That I care for you both, more than I thought possible. Penelope's breath caught. Morgan, I've been alone for 18 years, he continued. Told myself it was safer that way. No attachments, no pain when they're gone. He reached out tentatively, touching her cheek. But being here with you and Emma, I've started to remember what it feels like to be alive, to have something worth protecting. Tears shimmered in Penelope's eyes. We care for you too, more than I can say. Morgan drew her closer, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. I can't promise I'll be good at this, being part of a family again, but I want to try if you'll have me. Her answer was to rise on tiptoe and press her lips to his, a kiss so gentle it nearly broke him. Morgan responded with carefully restrained passion, aware of how long it had been since he'd allowed himself such vulnerability. When they parted, Penelope's smile was radiant. I think we can figure it out together. Christmas Day dawned bright and clear, the ranch blanketed in pristine snow. Emma woke early, rushing downstairs to find the small gifts Morgan and Penelope had prepared for her: the carved wooden horse, a new dress Penelope had sewn, and candies from town. But Morgan had one more surprise. After breakfast, he knelt before Emma, holding out a small package wrapped in brown paper. What's this? she asked, eyes wide. Open it and see, he encouraged. Inside was a silver locket, simple but beautiful. When Emma opened it, she found a tiny portrait Penelope had helped Morgan commission from a traveling photographer who'd passed through Redemption Creek. It's us, Emma breathed, tracing the image of the three of them. Our family. That's right, Morgan said, his voice thick with emotion. Our family. Emma threw her arms around his neck, and Morgan held her close, meeting Penelope's tearful gaze over the child's shoulder. Does this mean you're staying? Emma asked against his chest. Forever and ever? Morgan glanced at Penelope, who nodded encouragingly. Well, he said, I was thinking we might make it official. He gently set Emma aside and reached into his pocket, producing a simple gold band. Penelope's hand flew to her mouth. I'm not good with fancy words, Morgan said. But I love you, Penelope Wilson. You and Emma have brought light back into my life when I thought all the candles had gone out. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Yes, Penelope whispered, tears streaming down her face. Yes, Morgan. As he slipped the ring onto her finger and drew her into his arms, Emma danced around them, clapping her hands. I knew it, she exclaimed. I knew you would be my daddy. Morgan laughed, a full, rich sound that surprised even himself. You were right all along, little one. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Redemption Creek. The townsfolk who attended could hardly believe the transformation in the man they'd once called the cold cowboy. Where there had been stone, there was now warmth. Where there had been silence, there was now laughter. Years later, when the Wilson Keller ranch had grown prosperous and their family had expanded to include 2 more children, a boy with Morgan's serious eyes and a girl with Penelope's honey-colored hair, Morgan would often reflect on how close he'd come to missing this life. How one moment of compassion, one decision to help a desperate woman and her daughter, had changed everything. On Emma's 16th birthday, as they sat on the same porch where so much had begun, she asked him a question. Pa, she said, using the name she'd adopted soon after the wedding, do you ever regret staying? Giving up your freedom to roam? Morgan looked out over the land they'd built together, then back at his family, Penelope still beautiful after all these years, their younger children playing in the yard, and Emma herself on the cusp of womanhood but still with that same perceptive gaze. Not for a single moment, he answered truthfully. You can't be free when you're running from yourself. Real freedom came when I stopped running. He smiled at the young woman who had first seen through his carefully constructed walls. When a brave little girl whispered 5 words that changed everything. Emma smiled back, understanding. Please be my daddy, she recalled softly. Morgan nodded, his heart full. Smartest thing anyone ever asked of me. As the sun set over their home, painting the Wyoming sky in brilliant golds and purples, the man who was once known as the cold cowboy counted his blessings and found them beyond measure.